When we are taught the history of Latin America, we are usually shown crowns falling. We see emperors captured, cities burned, kings executed, and flags replaced. The story is clean and dramatic. The Spanish arrive. Indigenous rulers fall. Empires collapse. But that version of history focuses on visible power. It focuses on the crown. What it ignores are the systems beneath the crown. And those systems did not collapse as easily as the rulers who stood on top of them. Before Spanish arrival, the Americas were not empty wildernesses dotted with scattered tribes. They were structured political worlds. The Inca governed through a vast administrative network that stretched across mountains, deserts, and jungles. Their empire was divided into provinces, each overseen by appointed officials who reported upward through a hierarchy that maintained taxation, labor obligations, and military readiness. The Inca road system connected thousands of miles of territory, allowing rapid communication and supply movement. When Spanish forces captured Atahualpa, they believed they had broken the empire. But the administrative grid remained. The roads still existed. The labor system still functioned. The Spanish did not dismantle it. They used it. In Mesoamerica, the Maya world operated differently, but no less effectively. Instead of a single empire, it was organized into city-states bound by lineage, ritual authority, and alliance networks. Governance was rooted in sacred kingship, but power did not rest solely on the individual ruler. Councils, noble houses, and priestly authorities formed a political ecosystem that maintained continuity even when leaders died. When Spanish campaigns toppled major cities, they did not erase Maya political memory. They disrupted it. And that disruption was not permanent. Communities reorganized around surviving elites and adapted colonial structures to fit older frameworks. The Mapuche of southern Chile present an even clearer example. They had no centralized empire to collapse. Instead, they operated through decentralized war councils and local leadership structures that could mobilize quickly in times of threat. This flexibility became a weapon. When Spanish forces attempted conquest, they found no capital to capture that would end resistance. Leadership rotated. Authority was earned through performance in war. The absence of a single crown meant there was nothing simple to remove. The system absorbed loss and regenerated. In the Caribbean, Taíno society was structured through cacique, regional chiefdoms tied together through kinship and tribute. Spanish violence devastated populations, but the social structure did not vanish overnight. Spanish colonial governance often relied on surviving indigenous leaders to enforce labor quotas and maintain order. Even as political sovereignty was stripped away, communal organization persisted beneath imposed authority. This is the pattern that challenges the collapse narrative. Conquest removed rulers. It did not instantly remove systems. And because systems survived, resistance could re-emerge generations later. The Spanish Empire depended on infrastructure. It required roads, labor, tribute, and local administration. In many regions, it inherited these directly from the civilizations it claimed to conquer. In the Andes, the Spanish adapted the Inca Meta labor system into a colonial labor draft. In central Mexico, tribute records built by indigenous scribes became tools of Spanish taxation. In Yucatan, local governance structures were folded into colonial municipalities. Empire did not start from zero. It stood on indigenous foundations. This created a contradiction. Spanish authority claimed total domination, but its functionality relied on the survival of indigenous organization. Colonial cities were islands of Spanish presence surrounded by indigenous countryside governed through familiar structures beneath churches and plazas. Older systems continued to shape daily life. Because those systems endured, so did political consciousness. When rebellion surfaced centuries later, it was not spontaneous chaos. It was organized through inherited frameworks. The Maya-Cas War of the 19th century mobilized thousands not because rebellion was invented in that moment, but because communal governance still existed. Maroon kingdoms in Panama, Mexico, and Colombia did not emerge from disorder. They formed through disciplined political organization, blending African and indigenous models of state. Even spiritual authority survived structurally. Conversion campaigns sought to erase indigenous cosmology, but syncretism allowed continuity beneath Catholic forms. Ritual calendars, sacred geographies, and prophetic traditions remained embedded in communal life. Leaders who later invoked prophecy were drawing from systems that had never fully disappeared. The endurance of these systems explains why conquest in Latin America was never absolute. It was layered. Spanish rule imposed itself at the top, while indigenous organization persisted underneath. Over time, this layering created hybrid societies that were neither fully indigenous nor fully European. But hybridity does not mean erasure. It means adaptation. Understanding this changes how we view leadership. Figures like Jacinto Canek, Jacinto Pat, or the Mapuche Taquis were not anomalies. Appearing out of nowhere, they were products of structural continuity. They activated systems that had been maintained quietly for generations. They mobilized communities that still understood collective governance. The crown may have fallen, but the political architecture remained. The Spanish narrative of inevitability depended on spectacle. Public executions, burning cities, ceremonial declarations of conquest. But spectacle is not structure. Removing a king is visible. Dismantling a civilization is far more difficult. It requires destroying memory, language, kinship, and governance simultaneously. In Latin America, the total destruction never fully occurred. The Itza Maya remained independent until 1697, nearly 2 centuries after Spanish arrival in the region. The Mapuche resisted for centuries. The Chan Santa Cruz Maya state endured into the late 19th century. These were not remnants, they were functioning societies, drawing strength from systems that predated conquest, even in regions where armed resistance ceased. Structural endurance shaped survival. Land tenure systems, communal decision-making, and agricultural cycles persisted under colonial supervision. Spanish officials often complained that indigenous communities remained stubbornly attached to their old customs. Those customs were not relics, they were governance. When we pivot from kings to systems, we see something larger. The story of Latin America is not simply one of defeat followed by European dominance. It is one of endurance beneath domination. Indigenous civilizations were wounded, fragmented, and transformed, but not erased. The systems beneath the crown absorbed shock, adapted, and carried identity forward. Empires expand through force. Civilizations endure through structure. In Latin America, those structures outlived their moment of conquest. They resurfaced in rebellions, sustained cultural survival, and shaped the societies that exist today. The crown fell, the system remained, and that system is still alive. Follow for more history. They never taught us in school.